When Steve Wynn first proposed his Everett casino, his promise to clean up a long-neglected brownfield there was a major selling point. That promise, though, reminded us of something else. The old Monsanto site is just one of hundreds of polluted parcels that dot Massachusetts. In part two of this week's Focus Report, WGBH News reporter Ron Sanders looks at the chore of cleaning up after our industrial past.
Full of wildflowers and grass, this bucolic meadow in Ashland has a deadly past. It covers the toxic legacy of Nyanza, a dye and pigment company that for decades dumped chemical waste into the ground. Longtime neighbors Bernie and Marie Kane said there were clues something was wrong.
The water turning blue and yellow, and people hanging clothes out, and they were turning colors, and there was something. It was all right around the Nyanza site.
Nyanza closed in 1978, and the Environmental Protection Agency named it one of the nation's 10 worst Superfund sites. But its true legacy was just emerging, a cluster of rare cancers, like the one that claimed the life of the Kane's son, Kevin. Cases the State Department of Public Health linked to Nyanza.
We started to pinpoint it on a map, and it was amazing. We had actually tipped red heads on the pins, and you'd see a whole bunch here and a whole bunch there. It was amazing.
And Nyanza is just one site on the EPA's portrait of the Bay State's industrial past. These red triangles mark the 37 Superfund sites on the national priorities list for cleanup.
I'm going to shoot for the same time.
Jim Murphy of the EPA's New England region says cleanup action has been done at 22 of the 37 current Superfund sites, but that's only part of the picture.
Between Massachusetts and EPA with our removals program, there are a lot of state sites that have been identified.
The light brown dots on the EPA map mark hundreds of brownfields that have been identified, including the polluted Monsanto site in Everett, where Wynn Resorts is promising to clean up before developing a casino. But brownfields are considered less threatening than Superfund sites. The Baird and McGuire chemical site here in Holbrook was one of the first Superfund sites in Massachusetts, one of the worst in the nation. While the EPA says its construction work is complete here, there will be more work to do for many years.
In some cases, it's going to take 20, 30, 40 years or longer before the groundwater reaches the standards that we consider acceptable.
Arturo Romero has lived near the Baird and McGuire site for 30 years.
My major concern were my kids, how they were going to grow up knowing that there was this kind of problem.
So far, Arturo says there have been no unusual health problems in his family.
So far, it's been, 30 years been living here.
While other nearby residents blame their health problems on the Baird and McGuire site, there's been no documented link, like the one at the Ashland site that claimed Bernie and Marie Kane's son at the age of 25.
He wanted it cleaned up. He didn't want it to happen to anybody else.
But whether or not it'll ever be free of contaminants, I'm not so sure.
Another uncertain part of the Bay State's toxic legacy, Emily, is who pays. One of the principles of the Superfund site is that polluters pay, but you have to find them first, and in some cases they haven't been found, and the Baird and McGuire site is one of those cases.
All right, Ron, thanks for that report. Well, one of the most notorious industrial pollution cases of our time was the contamination of groundwater in Woburn by W.R. Grace. It was the basis for the 1998 film A Civil Action starring John Travolta as environmental attorney Jan Schlichtman. And Jan still specializes in toxic and environmental litigation and joins us here tonight, along with Carrie Bowie, who is the Brownfields Coordinator at the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Last night we were talking to the Wynn people, Jan, and I failed to ask a salient question, which was, why in the world isn't Monsanto paying for this? And why in the world Baird and McGuire? Why not the companies themselves?
Well, I mean, that's a very good question, and they should. I mean, this is a toxic legacy that they participated in, and the whole purpose of the federal and state laws is to get the polluter to pay. What is really significant about the Wynn situation is that it, through leadership, private capital was able to be attracted to the site, and so sufficient resources are going to be spent to clean up the site. But not every site is going to have a Wynn to come in where a polluter is not willing to pay. So it's a good question, and it doesn't have a good answer.
Okay, so Kerry, that's the next thing, because Wynn claims that it's going to take 6 months, under a year, to clean up, and that's 100 acres. Actually, it's not all a pollution site, but at least half of that. Why would it take 30 and 40 years for some of these brownfield sites if he can do it that quickly?
Actually, Emily, for most of the sites, I would say maybe 50% of the sites are actually cleaned up in the first year, and definitely under 6 years is the normal time frame for these brownfield sites.
Right, so Jan, you've taken kind of a different approach on this in recent years.
Yes.
Rather than litigation, you're bringing people to the party who, well, you explain it. It's sponsors, really. How does it work?
Well, I've come to the conclusion that we've gone through a period where we've had a growing awareness of the toxic legacy, but we can't leave these industrial dead zones in our community. It's killing our harbor fronts, our urban cores. It's not giving our communities a future. So we have to, it takes leadership, political leadership, a commitment and a willingness by the community, and it has to have the innovation and the resources of the private sector. All those things have to be brought together for us to be able to heal these toxic wounds from the past in order for there to be a future for the community. And we have no choice in that matter if we wish our children to have a future in which they can not just survive but thrive.
So you're sort of removing the threat of litigation and trying to bring people to the table to do it as a community.
In Woburn, we had a decades-long fight over the past. And I think one of the important lessons of that is we can't afford to spend decades fighting over the past. We have to work together so we can have a future.
And on that, does the state get involved in that, Kerry?
Yes, and the Brownfields program is really, to what Jan was saying, it's really about teamwork, it's about collaboration. We're really trying to put the incentives in place where we can bring the private sector in to clean up these brownfield sites.
It's still depressing. I mean, all these years later, you look at that map and you see all those brown dots, I mean, hundreds and hundreds. And as Jim Murray in the piece from the EPA said, we don't even know all of them. How can that be?
Well, what we have is, I think since 1984, we probably had 45,000 sites reported to us in Massachusetts. But since 1993, we've cleaned up over 33,000 of them. So we have a really good record of doing that cleanup. But those are the sites where we have had reported releases. There are sites where that hasn't been the case. So there probably are some out there, but we're not seeing as much of that as we move forward because of the regulations that are in place by EPA at the federal level and by the state here in Massachusetts.
Community commitment is the key. Community that wishes to acknowledge the truth of what's in their community and to make the commitment to work together with others to clean it up. That's the key, because there's a lot more sites, but it's going to be up to the communities to identify and to work together with others to correct them.
Largely because if you're high profile, this has gotten a lot of attention in Massachusetts. What about other states that didn't have a civil action and other similar cases? Are they languishing more than us?
Well, I think that because of the inspirational story, I think the Woburn's family struggle that was subject to a book and a movie, it got a lot of attention. It inspired other communities to take action. And it's rare to find a state in which there's not a Woburn situation where a community has taken the commitment and the courage to actually try and do something about it.
Canal and others.
Precisely, right.
And I'll add in on that. One thing here in Massachusetts, we have a licensed site professionals program where we actually have third-party contractors who come in and they can do more of these cleanups than in other states. So we license them, we audit them, but they can go out and do much more work than if we had all state employees doing that work.
All right, we'll check back in with you guys in 20 years and see how we're doing. Jan Schlickman, Gary Bowie, thanks so much.